fan of bikes, I see. Well, me too. And I've just painted a bunch of tiny ones, so I thought I'd show how I approach the project. Most of these are the Wasteland Elves from Ed's Miniatures, but I'll put all the links in the description. Naturally, I will forget to put links in the description, so please remind me in the comments below. Now, before I show the painting, I've put some utterly basic effort into the bases that I should probably show off first. I'm generally aiming at a rocky desert look for these models, but I've noticed some of these bikes really do look cool with one wheel up off the ground on a larger rock. So after working out positioning a larger stone into kind of how I want it, I superglued it down with a bunch of small rocks around it and then doused the whole lot in baking powder. And that's going to both make sure it's nicely glued down, nice and secure, but it's also going to at least pretend like I'm putting some effort into how the overall base looks at the end. To add some variety, I'll use patches of sand and some more patches of baking powder, all pulled over, just superglue to hold it down. When it comes to the last areas, that's where the wheels need to be attached to the base. So once I put some superglue down, hold the model on, I'm going to pour some yet more baking powder over it, as that's going to react quickly. It's going to make it nice and secure and keep the model on that base. Right, given that I'm showing off these last two bikes in the set, and I've done everything that I want to do before the primer goes on, I primed them in grey and set about on some really quick and easy paintwork. Whilst I have in other videos leaned towards spending a lot longer on any given model to enjoy the process and to have a nicer finished model at the end, there is certainly a lot of satisfaction in this type of quick and messy work where you can get whole squads of models done in a few days. The metalwork of the bike will look better with a darker overall tone, as this is a post-apocalyptic set, of course. And to kick that off, I've stippled on a whole bunch of black paint over all of the components that will be metal, which, to be fair, is pretty much most of the bike. This isn't my usual stippling that I use for weathering, that comes later. Rather, this is a really heavy coat covering all of the engines, the wheels, the frame, suspension, even a lot of the fairing as well. It is important, therefore, to maintain a good thin consistency of paint. Whereas with some stippling, a little bit of thick kind of splotchiness to it can be forgiven. With this kind of coat that I'm going for now, any kind of lumps or bumps will leave that physical texture and will be quite visible later on. The lighter steps of stippling comes later. A darker silver followed by a dark brown and an orange, each kind of lighter in tone and also lighter in how much coverage I'm doing. And this adds loads of variety to the bikes, making sure each one appears individual but also cohesive when they're placed together. And you might think this took forever, but it really didn't. And each colour only takes a minute or so, the longer for the first layer and a little quicker for the last layer. But even so, like the 10 or 12 bikes that I've painted in this set, the total time is really minimal. Now, there is a little bit of a specific colour going on each of these bikes. And for the one I'm showing in the video today, that's going to be orange. For each bike, I've put a primary or secondary colour on all of the fairing, as there's a good chance I'm going to be using these in my racing game. Having colours to tell them apart from a distance is just a useful feature to have, but it's also going to tie them together into the theme of post-apocalypse. You might notice that I dropped a little matte medium into the orange, and that is quite useful here for that theme. Because I've already put all of this effort into creating all of this harsh variation in the tones underneath, I don't want to just obliterate that with a nice opaque layer of orange going on top. Instead, the medium lets me put on really thin glaze layers. And that means that as much as the orange is still going to be orange on all of the fairing, it's going to be spotty and splotchy and have all of the variation from what went on underneath. For the other bike, I went with grey fairing, which when it was done I wasn't quite as happy with. However, it does still show kind of the process and the effect that I was after. The next step, as is traditional for quick and messy paint schemes like this, is a black wash. Now, I mix my own using inks, and that gives me the option of mixing my washes in slightly different ways depending on what project I'm working with. And in this case, that is dark and heavy, a bit like my humour. This totally fills all of the recesses of the model, especially the places that I missed with my black paint at the beginning, but it also darkens absolutely everything, leaving an oily, mucky look over all of those orange spots that make it look rusty and the orange fairing, which now just looks really dirty. But it's a little too much, and it needs some brightness to contrast all of that darkness, and I'll achieve that once the wash was dry with some brighter silver. Now this is a mithril silver, and it gives a really reflective looking edge when applied as an edge highlight, making sure that every part of the bike looks like it's well used, half-heartedly maintained, but most importantly a still running machine. You can of course go to a lot of trouble with details here, scratching up the leather of the seats for example, or any stowage, painting in the lights or other features that you can find on the particular model depending on where it's from. Or you can sort of leave it as it is. That's plenty good enough for a tabletop model. In fact, it's way better than good enough. Once you've painted a rider to go on top, these are going to look great. As you can see, my bikes are done, but my bikers are not, and in fact quite a few of them haven't even finished being built yet. I've got a little kit bashing here and a little milliput there, but I'll get these done by probably the end of the century, I guess. Don't fret about it. Anyway, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for popping by.